You've used the same hand to write, eat, and wave hello your entire life, and you have almost certainly never asked why that hand won. Here's the strange part. Roughly 9 out of every 10 humans who have ever lived favored their right hand, in every culture, always. By the end of this, you'll realize your dominant hand was decided before you ever picked up a single object, and here's exactly how. You'd assume your parents, your teachers, or years of practice quietly trained your dominant hand into existence through simple, repeated habit. Most people assume the opposite is true. Actually, ultrasound scans show babies favoring one thumb to suck inside the womb, months before birth. That single sucking preference, spotted as early as 8 weeks before birth, predicts which hand that same baby will favor for the rest of life. You were already choosing a favorite hand before you had fingernails fully formed, before your parents had even picked out a name for you. Now consider what this really means. Handedness isn't something raised into a child. It's something the body appears to decide almost immediately. Somewhere deep in early human history, archaeologists went looking for proof that this same right-hand bias existed long before written history began. They found it hiding in stone, on tools chipped by hands that vanished nearly 2 million years ago, long before modern humans ever existed. Ancient stone tools carry tiny scratch marks left behind during their shaping, and those scratches lean overwhelmingly in one consistent, telling direction. Imagine this. A toolmaker grips a stone core steady, striking flakes away with a hammerstone, leaving faint diagonal scars only a right hand would create. Researchers studying these scratch patterns on tools nearly 1.8 million years old found the same right-hand bias we still see today. That means the exact ratio of right to left hands in your life today likely existed almost unchanged in creatures barely recognizable as human. But that's not the wild part. An even stranger clue was hiding on cave walls, painted by hands that vanished long ago. Deep inside caves in France, Spain, and Indonesia, ancient artists pressed a hand flat against stone and blew pigment around it, leaving a perfect outline. Here's the detail nobody expects. The vast majority of these ancient hand stencils show a left hand outlined, not a right one. That imbalance makes sense once you picture the artist holding a blowpipe or brush in their favored right hand, tracing the opposite hand instead. You press your non-dominant hand flat against cold stone, holding pigment in your favored hand, blowing color around fingers that aren't doing the work. Now here's where it gets interesting. Scientists eventually traced this bias back to something happening deep inside the brain itself, not the hand. Your brain's left hemisphere typically controls your right hand, and that same hemisphere usually also houses your brain's main language center. This is where the story splits from simple habit into biology. Hand preference and language ability appear to share the very same wiring blueprint. Somewhere along the way, ancient cultures noticed the left hand behaving differently and decided that difference must mean something dark or dangerous. The word sinister comes directly from an old word for left, a linguistic fossil left behind by centuries of quiet suspicion. Turns out, the truth is even stranger than simple superstition. Entire school systems once forced naturally left-handed children to switch hands by force. Picture a child gently, but firmly having a pencil pulled from their left hand and pressed into their right, again and again, for years. But there's a catch nobody mentions. Forcing the switch changed which hand held the pencil, yet it rarely changed the brain wiring underneath. Most people assume that ratio must have shifted over time, as attitudes toward left-handers slowly relaxed across most modern societies. Here's what actually happened next. The measured ratio barely moved at all, holding remarkably steady near 9 right-handers for every 1 left-hander. That steady ratio holds true across wildly different eras, continents, and cultures, almost as if something deeper than custom keeps it locked in place. Here's what this really meant for genetics. Scientists expected to eventually find one single gene responsible for deciding which hand wins. Here's the part scientists still argue about. No single handedness gene has ever been found, despite decades of careful, well-funded genetic searching. Instead, researchers found dozens of small genetic factors, each nudging the odds slightly, none powerful enough to decide the outcome alone. You inherit a loaded set of dice from your parents, not a single instruction, and then your own developing body rolls them. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Identical twins, sharing identical DNA and the same household, can still end up with opposite dominant hands. That single fact quietly rules out both pure genetics and pure upbringing as the full answer to this ancient, stubborn question. Somewhere inside the developing embryo, something close to biological coin flipping appears to nudge each twin toward a slightly different wiring pattern. Researchers eventually connected this randomness to something surprising, the same early process that decides where your heart sits inside your chest. Your heart usually forms slightly left of center, and the same asymmetric cascade of signals may also help decide your dominant hand. Most ancient people had no idea their heart position, and their favored hand might be quietly linked through the very same developmental signal. Think about growing an entire body from one single cell, and somewhere in that chaos, left and right quietly get assigned forever. You are not simply born right-handed by chance alone. You're born asymmetric from the very first days your cells begin dividing. Now here's the twist most people never hear. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, show individual hand preferences but nothing close to our lopsided human ratio. A chimpanzee troop might split roughly evenly between left-handed and right-handed individuals, with no clear species-wide favorite emerging at all. That single difference suggests something happened specifically along the human evolutionary branch, tightening an already existing bias into something far more extreme. Here's why that number should stop you cold. Some researchers believe that same tight 9-to-1 ratio may already be over 500,000 years old. That means empires rose and fell, languages appeared and vanished, entire civilizations came and went, while this single ratio barely shifted at all. Somewhere along that enormous stretch of time, whatever locked in that ratio clearly had almost nothing to do with any particular culture or custom. But that was not the end of the story, because left-handers apparently kept surviving despite centuries of open suspicion and outright punishment. Some researchers point to combat and sport, where a rare left-handed fighter trained opponents never expect catches them off guard mid-fight. That rare advantage may have quietly kept left-handedness surviving in the population, even while entire cultures tried hard to stamp it out. We now face the same imbalance ancient warriors faced. A small, stubborn minority whose rarity itself becomes an unexpected kind of strength. Here's what nobody expects. Fencing, boxing, and tennis all show left-handers winning championships far more often than their numbers should predict. And once you know this, everything else makes more sense. Rarity itself, not raw skill alone, quietly tilts certain contests in a left-hander's favor. For centuries, everyday tools weren't neutral either. Scissors, school desks, and even simple can openers were designed almost exclusively for right hands. You try cutting paper with scissors built for the opposite hand, and suddenly a simple task turns clumsy, slow, and strangely frustrating. Meanwhile, an entirely separate mystery appeared. True ambidexterity, using both hands equally well, turned out to be far rarer than people assumed. Fewer than 1 in every 100 people can genuinely perform complex tasks equally well with either hand, despite what movies often suggest. That rarity suggests true even-handedness isn't some peaceful middle ground. It may actually reflect a slightly less stable version of brain lateralization. Researchers studying deaf communities using sign language found the exact same lopsided ratio showing up in which hand leads each sign. That detail mattered enormously, because it proved this bias has nothing to do with spoken language or which hand holds a pencil. Here's the part historians still argue about. Some ancient burial sites show grave goods positioned specifically near a skeleton's dominant right hand. You imagine mourners gently placing a favorite tool beside a hand that spent decades gripping it, without ever knowing why that hand was chosen. Somewhere between genetics, embryonic chance, ancient tool marks, and old superstition, one enormous fact keeps quietly resurfacing across every single study. The ratio itself refuses to move. Not centuries of forced switching, not changing attitudes, not entirely different cultures scattered across the whole planet. That stubbornness suggests your favored hand was never really a choice at all, just an early signal your body committed to instantly. You realize the pencil in your hand, the hand you wave with, the hand you write with, were all decided long before memory even begins. Here's the last piece of it. The same hidden coin flip that shaped your heart's position likely also shaped which hand became your favorite. Every time you reach for a cup, a pen, or a door handle, you're repeating a decision made inside a developing embryo long ago. So the next time you reach for something, remember the thumb in the womb, the scratched stone tool, and the coin that never landed 50-50.